George Perry Cobb would survive fighting in the Civil War, only to die a few years later in a terrible accident. George was born on July 13, 1846, in this area around Hamilton, New York, but he was bitten by the travel bug and would live in lots of other places around central New York pretty early on. When he was 18 years old, he enlisted to fight for the Union Army in 1864. As you can see on his stone, he became a private for Company K, 2nd Regiment Heavy Artillery. A year later, just a few months after the war had ended, George mustered out. The 27-year-old George was living in New York City 9 years later and decided to make some easy-ish money by heading to the West Indies to bring back a cargo of fruit to sell. He sailed down the East Coast, and on March 18, 1874, the captain, who was his friend, sailed into Baltimore, Maryland harbor to stop for the night. George, the captain, and the first mate made their way down the docks to head into town for an evening of, let's say, amusement. Around 11 p.m., the captain and the first mate started making their way back to the ship, but because they were sailing first that morning, they were way at the end and the dock wasn't long enough, so they had to climb over a bunch of other boats and steamers just to get to it. But by morning, George still hadn't shown up. Thinking perhaps he had changed his mind and headed back north for home, the captain dropped a quick letter in the mail to let George's brother know that he was probably on his way, and then the captain continued on to the Caribbean. A month later, a body was found in the Baltimore harbor. Although it was, of course, unrecognizable at this point, tucked into the coat pocket of the person were letters addressed to Mr. George Cobb. His body was returned to his brother and placed in this cemetery in Hamilton next to his mother and sister, who had died just a few years before George had.